"Onyx, calm down! Stop right now!" The Navy SEAL shouted to his childhood companion as the dog panicked, sensing something terribly wrong. Driven by pure instinct to protect, the dog lunged forward without hesitation, never realizing that the act meant to save others was pushing him toward death. A Navy SEAL reached down into the darkness and grabbed a life that was never meant to trust humans. "I've got you, buddy," he whispered as he caught the dog's leg at the edge of the abyss, breathing like a man who had just saved himself. In that moment, all training became meaningless. No rules, no orders, only a life slipping from his hand. And it was then he believed God placed his hand over them both, so one human hand would not let go, and a miracle could happen. If this moment speaks to you, tell us where you're watching from, and like, subscribe, and stay with us for more healing stories. Chapter 1. Under the northern sky, old things return. The road north narrowed as Rowan Hale drove deeper into the upper reaches of the country, where towns became names on weather maps rather than places people visited on purpose. Pine forests pressed in on both sides, tall and straight like soldiers long dismissed from duty, but still standing at attention. Snow lay in clean, quiet sheets beneath them, unbroken except for animal tracks and the occasional logging road vanishing into shadow. Rowan drove with both hands steady on the wheel. He was 35, 6 feet tall, built lean and compact in the way of men who trained for function rather than display. His face was clean-shaven, the razor having passed over it that morning out of habit more than vanity, leaving his square jaw and sharp cheekbones fully exposed. The cold northern wind had given his skin a weathered tone lighter than most men who worked outdoors, but marked by seasons spent under harsh skies. His hair was dark brown, cut close in a military style, slightly longer than regulation, as if he'd allowed himself just one small rebellion after leaving the teams. His eyes were a pale gray-blue alert without being restless, calm without softness, eyes that had seen too much to flinch easily. The war never left men like Rowan. It simply learned to live quietly inside them. In the passenger seat, a large German shepherd sat upright, watching the world pass with focused intensity. Briggs was black and gold, his coat thick and well-kept, built with the balanced strength of a working dog, rather than the exaggerated bulk of show lines. His ears stayed alert, swiveling at distant sounds Rowan couldn't hear. A black collar sat snug around his neck, simple and functional. Briggs was 5 years old. He had been trained, deployed, and retired with Rowan. He knew commands, routines, and silence. More than that, he knew his handler's moods, the way sailors know tides. As the truck climbed higher into the northern hills, Rowan felt something loosen inside his chest. Just a fraction. He hadn't come north for peace. Men like him didn't chase peace anymore. He came because his uncle had called, because family still mattered, and because this place held something Rowan hadn't thought about in years. Memory. Caleb Merritt's cabin stood near the edge of a frozen lake, set back from the road and half hidden by trees. The structure was old but solid, built of darkened timber and reinforced over decades by a man who fixed things rather than replaced them. Caleb himself stepped out onto the porch as Rowan parked. He was in his late 60s, broad-shouldered despite age, with a stooped posture that came not from weakness but from years of physical labor. His hair was gray and uneven, his beard untrimmed, and his face deeply lined by wind, sun, and a stubborn refusal to complain. He wore a red and black flannel shirt beneath a canvas jacket stained with grease and pine sap, jeans faded pale at the knees, and worn leather boots caked with old mud. "Well," Caleb said, voice rough but warm, "you look less broken than last time." Rowan allowed a small smile. Low bar. Caleb's eyes shifted to Briggs. "And you brought backup." Briggs did not bark. He stepped forward, posture firm but respectful, eyes never leaving Caleb's hands. "That one's trained," Caleb said approvingly. "I can tell." Rowan shut the truck door. "He keeps me honest." They stood in silence for a moment, the cold air carrying the sharp scent of pine and frozen water. Then Briggs stiffened. Rowan felt it instantly. The dog's ears went rigid. His body leaned forward, weight shifting subtly, not aggressive alert. Rowan turned toward the tree line. At first, he saw nothing. Then the shadows moved. A large black shape stood just beyond the reach of sunlight, half concealed among the trunks. It did not advance. It did not retreat. It simply stood there, watching. The animal was big, bigger than Briggs. Long-legged, deep-chested, its fur a uniform, light-absorbing black. Its posture was calm, but not relaxed, the stance of something that belonged to the wild and knew it. Rowan's breath caught. The animal took one step forward. Then it stopped. It lowered its head slightly, nostrils flaring as it tested the air. Briggs growled low, controlled, a warning rather than a challenge. "Easy," Rowan murmured, one hand dropping instinctively to Briggs's collar. The black animal lifted its head. Its eyes met Rowan's, and something ancient and impossible stirred. The animal did not recognize Rowan by sight. It recognized him by memory, older than words, by the faint trace of fear and iron still carried in his scent, by the rhythm of his breath, by something tied not to time, but to survival. The black animal took another step forward, and then, impossibly, it sat. Not submissive, not afraid, waiting. Rowan felt a tightness grip his chest, sudden and disorienting. "Caleb," he said quietly, "is that—" Caleb exhaled slowly. "Yeah." The name landed between them like a truth long buried. "Onyx." Briggs shifted, hackles raised now, confusion flickering across his intelligent face. This was not how strangers behaved. This was not how threats announced themselves. Rowan knelt, keeping one hand on Briggs, the other resting against his own knee. The black animal onyx rose again, careful, measured. He did not approach Briggs. He angled his body instead toward Rowan, attention focused solely on him. Up close, Rowan could see more details. Onyx's fur was thick and clean, built for cold winters. His limbs were long and powerful, his shoulders broad, his muzzle narrow and angular. There were no scars on him now, but Rowan remembered when there had been. Caleb spoke quietly. "He's lived out here a long time, comes and goes, never caused trouble." Briggs let out a sharper growl. Onyx paused, turned his head slightly toward Briggs. The air tightened. Two working animals, two protectors, two different worlds. Rowan stood. He stepped between them. "No," he said, not loud, but absolute. Both dogs froze. Rowan faced Briggs first, his voice steady. Stay. Briggs hesitated. His eyes flicked to Onyx, then back to Rowan. After a moment that stretched thin as wire, he obeyed, sitting down but remaining tense. Rowan turned to Onyx. The black animal watched him closely, ears forward, body coiled but still. Rowan extended his hand, not toward Onyx's head, but low, palm open, offering scent rather than dominance. Onyx leaned forward, slightly, and inhaled. A shudder passed through him. Rowan swallowed. He hadn't expected that. Caleb watched, expression unreadable. You always did have a way with animals. Rowan didn't answer. His hand trembled, not with fear, but recognition. The sun dipped lower as the cold deepened. Eventually, Onyx stepped back, retreating a few paces into the trees. He did not flee. He did not turn his back. He watched Rowan until the cabin door closed. Inside, warmth filled the small space. The smell of wood smoke and old leather settled around them. Briggs paced briefly, unsettled, before lying down near the hearth, eyes still sharp. Caleb poured coffee. You all right? Rowan nodded. Just wasn't expecting that. Caleb studied him. Some things don't disappear just because time passes. Rowan stared into his mug. Outside, unseen but felt, something moved through the trees, patient, watchful, and waiting. Under the northern sky, old things had returned, and they were not finished yet. Chapter 2. The Space Between Teeth and Trust. Morning arrived quietly in the north, the kind of quiet that did not announce itself with birdsong or distant traffic, but with absence. No wind, no voices, just pale light sliding across frozen ground and settling on the cabin like a held breath. Rowan Hale woke before dawn, as he always did. Years of deployment had trained his body to rise without an alarm, eyes opening, already alert, breath controlled. For a moment, just a moment, he did not know where he was. Then the smell of wood smoke and pine returned him to the present. Beside the bed, Briggs was already awake. The German shepherd lay on his side, head lifted, ears angled toward the window. His amber-brown eyes tracked something beyond the glass, unblinking. He was not tense in the way of immediate danger, but he was not relaxed either. It was the posture of a soldier on perimeter watch. Rowan swung his legs off the bed and pulled on his boots. "What do you hear?" he murmured. Briggs did not look at him. His attention remained fixed outside. Rowan crossed the room and drew the curtain back an inch. The forest stood motionless. Snow clung to branches like ash after a fire. The frozen lake reflected the sky in muted gray blue, and somewhere beyond the trees, out of sight, but not out of awareness, something moved, not close, but present. Rowan let the curtain fall back into place. He exhaled slowly. Caleb Merritt was already awake, seated at the small kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and a folded newspaper that had not been read. His posture was loose, but his eyes were sharp, tracking Rowan the way men who lived alone learned to track changes in air. "You sleep?" Caleb asked. "Enough," Rowan said. Caleb grunted. "Forest's restless." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "You say that like it's weather." Caleb's mouth twitched. "Up here it is." Briggs entered the kitchen and sat at Rowan's left, positioning himself between Rowan and the back door without being told. His tail remained still, his body angled slightly toward the unseen woods. Caleb noticed. He always noticed. "That dog of yours," he said, nodding at Briggs. "He reads the land like a map." Rowan poured himself coffee. "He reads me." Caleb leaned back in his chair. "And the other one?" Rowan did not answer immediately. Later that morning, Rowan stepped outside alone. He moved slowly, deliberately, boots crunching softly in the snow. He did not carry a weapon. That choice was intentional. The air bit at his exposed skin, sharp and clean. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and waited. It did not take long. Onyx emerged from the tree line without sound, as if he had always been there, and only now chose to be visible. In daylight, Rowan could see him more clearly. Onyx was massive, larger than Rowan had remembered, his frame long and powerful, built for endurance rather than speed. His coat was uniformly black, thick and dense, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. His eyes were a pale, gold, intelligent, steady, and unsettling in their awareness. He stood still, assessing. Rowan did not move. Minutes passed like that, neither man nor animal advancing. The cold crept through Rowan's jacket, but he remained. Finally, Onyx took a step forward, then another. He stopped at the invisible boundary where forest met clearing, paws sinking lightly into the snow. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to something beneath the silence. Rowan felt it then, a pressure behind his eyes, a faint tightening in his chest. Not fear, recognition. "I didn't come back for you," Rowan said quietly, more to himself than to the animal. "Didn't even know you were still here." Onyx did not react to the words. He watched Rowan's face instead. Behind the cabin, Briggs whined softly. Rowan stiffened. He turned his head just enough to see Briggs standing at the back door, Caleb behind him, one hand resting on the frame. "Careful," Caleb called. "Briggs isn't wrong to be wary." Rowan raised one hand without turning. "I know." Onyx's ears flicked toward the sound. His body shifted, not aggressive, but alert. Briggs stepped out onto the snow. The distance between the two animals closed to 20 feet. This time, the tension was different. No growling, no circling. Just two working creatures measuring intent. Briggs stood tall, chest forward, tail level. His black and gold coat rippled slightly in the cold. He was 5 years old, in his prime. His muscles defined, but not bulky. A small scar cut through the edge of his left ear, barely visible unless the light caught it just right. Onyx lowered his head a fraction. Not submission, acknowledgement. Rowan felt his pulse quicken. "Easy," he said again, not as a command, but as a reminder. Briggs glanced back at him. In that look was trust layered over instinct, discipline pressed against uncertainty. Briggs took one step forward. Onyx did not retreat. The space between them tightened until Rowan could feel it humming, like a live wire buried under snow. Then something unexpected happened. Onyx turned his head away, just slightly, a deliberate break in eye contact. Rowan sucked in a breath. Caleb swore softly behind him. Briggs froze. His ears twitched, confusion flickering across his face. This was not how dominance disputes ended. This was not how wild things behaved. Onyx did not look back. Instead, he sat, not close, not far, sat calm, grounded, unthreatening. Rowan felt something shift deep in his chest, something old and fragile loosening its grip. It was the same posture Onyx had taken years ago, kneeling in snow and pain, choosing stillness over panic. Caleb's voice was low. "Rowan, that's not a dog behavior." Rowan did not answer. He couldn't, because for the first time since returning, he understood something he hadn't allowed himself to name. This was not coincidence. The moment passed, without ceremony. Onyx, goose, and backed away into the trees, vanishing as soundlessly as he had appeared. Briggs remained still for a long moment, then turned and sat beside Rowan, leaning his shoulder lightly against Rowan's thigh. It was not a demand, it was reassurance. Rowan rested his hand on Briggs's neck, fingers curling into thick fur. "Good," he murmured. Briggs exhaled, tension draining slowly. Caleb approached, boots crunching. He studied the forest where Onyx had disappeared. "He's different," Caleb said. "Always has been." Rowan nodded. "You knew." Caleb's gaze dropped. "I suspected." They stood together, two men bound by blood and memory, watching a place where the past refused to stay buried. That afternoon, a truck pulled into the clearing. It was old but well maintained, bearing the emblem of the local forestry service on its door. A man stepped out, tall and lean, with a weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. "Lucas Reed," he said, extending a gloved hand. "Forest Service. Part-time." Lucas had the look of someone shaped by solitude. His beard was short and uneven, his uniform worn but clean. A radio hung at his belt, silent. His movements were economical, deliberate. "I heard there was a large animal moving near the lake," Lucas continued. "Figured I'd take a look." Rowan felt Briggs tense again. Caleb answered first. "We're aware." Lucas's eyes flicked to the tree line. "You've seen it then?" Rowan met his gaze. "Yes." Lucas studied Rowan for a long moment, then nodded once. "If it keeps its distance, there's no cause for concern, for now." He paused, then added quietly, "But animals like that don't stay invisible forever." When Lucas left, the quiet returned heavier than before. Night fell early. Rowan sat on the porch steps, Briggs at his side, the forest breathing around them. He looked up at the stars, cold, distant, unwavering. "Some things," he said softly, "don't ask permission to come back." Briggs leaned into him. From deep within the trees, far enough to be felt rather than heard, came a single low sound. Not a howl, not a bark. A note held just long enough to remind the land that it was not empty. Rowan closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he did not feel alone. Chapter 3: The Winter That Never Left. The storm did not announce itself with thunder. It arrived the way northern storms always did, quiet at first, almost polite. A thin veil of snow drifted down through the trees, soft enough to look harmless, cold enough to promise otherwise. Rowan Hale stood at the cabin window, watching the flakes settle on the frozen lake. The sky had the pale bleached color of bone, and the air felt heavy, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Behind him, Caleb Merritt moved slowly around the kitchen, setting out plates, pouring whiskey into two thick glasses. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, the motions of a man who had learned that rushing only made things worse. Briggs lay near the hearth, head on his paws, eyes half closed but never fully asleep. Every few minutes, his ears flicked, tracking sounds too distant or subtle for human notice. Outside, somewhere beyond the tree line, Onyx remained unseen, but not unfelt. "You remember the storm," Caleb said at last, his voice rough, almost careful. Rowan did not turn. "I remember pieces." Caleb nodded. "That's how it stays with you. Comes back in fragments." He slid one of the whiskey glasses across the table. Rowan took it, the warmth seeping into his fingers. The fire popped softly, snow thickened against the windows. Caleb sat across from Rowan, leaning back in his chair. In the firelight, his face looked older than it had that morning, the lines deeper, the shadows heavier. He ran a hand through his gray beard and sighed. "You never asked me why I let him stay," Caleb said. Rowan's jaw tightened. "I thought I knew." "You didn't," Caleb replied gently. "Not all of it." Rowan waited. Caleb took a slow sip of whiskey before speaking again. "You were 12, angry at everything. Your dad had just died. Your mother had moved away, and you showed up here with more rage than words. You didn't trust people. Not then. Maybe not ever." Rowan swallowed. The memory hit with a dull ache, not sharp enough to cut, but heavy enough to slow his breathing. Caleb continued. "When you came back that night with that black bundle in your arms, half frozen, bleeding just enough to scare the hell out of me, I saw something change in you." Rowan looked down at his glass. The amber liquid trembled slightly. "He was small," Rowan said, "too small to be alone." Caleb nodded. "Barely 2 weeks old. His paw fit in the center of your palm." The memory unfolded slowly, like frost creeping across glass. The storm had been worse than anyone expected. Snow fell sideways, driven by a wind sharp enough to cut skin. The forest howled, trees groaning under the weight of ice. Rowan, then just a boy, had slipped away from the cabin, angry and restless, boots crunching into drifts, already knee-high. He remembered the cold first, then the sound. Not a bark, not a howl, a thin, broken noise, swallowed almost immediately by the storm. Rowan had followed it without thinking, heart pounding, fingers numb. He found the creature near the base of a fallen pine, curled tight, fur matted with snow and blood. One hind leg was scraped raw, the skin torn but not deep. The wound wasn't fatal. The cold would have been. Rowan had peeled off his coat, wrapping the black bundle against his chest, feeling a tiny, frantic heartbeat flutter beneath his ribs. "I couldn't leave him," Rowan said quietly. Caleb's eyes softened. "I know." Back in the present, the wind rattled the windows harder. Caleb leaned forward, forearms resting on the table. "I told you no. Said it was dangerous. Said it wasn't a dog. Said the forest doesn't give things back once it takes them." Rowan's lips curved faintly. "I didn't listen." "No," Caleb agreed. "You didn't." He smiled then, small and sad. "You stood there shaking, soaked, and told me if I made you put him back outside, you'd run away with him. Said you'd rather freeze than abandon him." Rowan closed his eyes. Caleb exhaled. "I've raised cattle, buried friends, and watched storms take whole valleys, but I've never seen a boy look at anything the way you looked at that animal." He gestured toward the door, toward the unseen woods. "That's why I let him stay, not because I trusted him." Rowan looked up. "But because I trusted you." A sudden sound cut through the cabin. Not from outside, from Briggs. The German shepherd lifted his head sharply, ears rigid, eyes locked on the back door. A low, uncertain whine slipped from his throat. Not fear, not aggression. Recognition. Rowan stood instantly, heart rate spiking with the reflex of old training. He crossed the room and opened the door a fraction. Cold air rushed in. On the edge of the porch, just beyond the reach of firelight, Onyx stood, closer than he had ever been. Snow dusted his black fur, clinging to his shoulders and muzzle. His eyes reflected the light, pale gold and steady. He did not look at Rowan. He looked at Briggs. For a long moment, neither animal moved. Then, Onyx lowered his head slightly, not in submission, not in threat, but in something that looked dangerously like memory. Briggs' whine faded into silence. Rowan felt his chest tighten. The door creaked softly as he closed it again. Caleb stared at him. "He never comes that close." Rowan's voice was barely above a whisper. "He did before." The memory returned, uninvited. Days after the rescue, the storm had grown worse. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, sealing them in. Caleb and Rowan took turns feeding the small black pup warm milk with an eyedropper, wrapping him in towels, keeping him close to the fire. They had argued about names. Rowan had insisted on Onyx because the pup's fur swallowed light, because it sounded strong enough to survive the winter. Caleb had rolled his eyes, but let it stand. The pup healed quickly, too quickly. His eyes opened early, revealing a strange, knowing intelligence that unsettled Caleb more than once. He learned to walk sooner than expected. He followed Rowan everywhere, clumsy and determined, whining whenever the boy disappeared from sight. "He imprinted on you," Caleb said now. "Didn't know the word back then, just knew he chose you." Rowan nodded. "I chose him too." The fire burned lower as the night deepened. Caleb refilled their glasses, hands steady despite the memories surfacing between them. "There's something else," Caleb said. Rowan looked up. "I never told you this because you were a kid, and then you were gone," Caleb continued. "But that night you slipped on the ridge when the storm came back hard, and you didn't return." Rowan stiffened. "That wasn't luck," Caleb said. "We searched for hours, yelled until our throats bled, couldn't see 10 feet ahead." His eyes drifted toward the window. Then Onyx started to move. He'd been pacing all evening, restless. Suddenly he stopped whining and took off into the trees like he knew exactly where you were. Rowan's breath slowed. Caleb's voice dropped. "He didn't just lead us." He stopped, looked back, waited, then howled. A long silence followed. "Not a dog howl," Caleb said quietly. "Something deeper." Rowan stared at the fire, the flames blurring. "That sound cut through the storm," Caleb went on. "We followed it. Found you at the base of the ravine, hypothermic, alive." Rowan swallowed hard. "You never said." Caleb shook his head. "Didn't need to. You left not long after. Joined the military. Built a life that didn't include this place." He met Rowan's gaze, but he never left. Later, Rowan lay awake in the dark. Briggs curled beside the bed, solid and warm. The wind outside carried the same pitch it had all those years ago. The storm pressed against the cabin, patient and relentless. Rowan stared at the ceiling, memories threading together in patterns he hadn't allowed himself to see. He had always believed he survived because he was trained, because he adapted, because he was strong. Now, he wondered how many times something else had been watching from the tree line, unseen but present. Briggs shifted in his sleep, pressing closer. From far beyond the lake, a low sound drifted through the night, so faint it might have been imagined. Rowan closed his eyes. The winter that never left had finally found its voice. Chapter 4. When the forest draws a line. Morning broke brittle and bright, the kind of cold that sharpened edges rather than numbed them. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the world scrubbed clean, snow flattened into a flawless skin across the lake, branches etched in white, air so clear it seemed to ring when Rowan breathed. He stepped outside with Briggs at his side. The German shepherd moved in a loose heel, attentive without pressing. His black and gold coat caught the light, breath steaming as he paused to read the air. He was calm this morning, watchful, but grounded, as if the forest had finally explained something to him during the night. Rowan adjusted the strap of his pack and scanned the tree line. Onyx was nowhere in sight. That absence carried weight. Caleb emerged from the cabin moments later, pulling on gloves, his canvas jacket creaking with use. He looked older in the daylight, the lines around his eyes carved deeper by years of wind and solitude. Lucas called before sunrise, Caleb said. Said he'd swing by later, asked a few questions. Rowan nodded. About last night? About the tracks near the lake. Something big crossed close to the road. Briggs's ears lifted. Rowan crouched and examined the snow near the porch. The prints were faint, stretched by drifting powder, but unmistakable large pads, long stride, purposeful direction. Not hunting, Rowan said quietly. Moving. Caleb studied him. You always read signs like that? Rowan's mouth tightened. I had teachers. They walked the lake's edge together, Rowan and Briggs moving ahead, while Caleb followed at a slower pace. The ice groaned beneath the sun, shifting like something alive but patient. Briggs stopped abruptly. Rowan froze with him. Across the lake, near the narrow mouth, where water fed into the basin, a figure stood watching. It wasn't Onyx. The man was tall and spare, wearing a brown jacket and a knit cap pulled low. A camera hung from his neck, its strap frayed with use. He stood still, waiting to be noticed rather than hiding. When Rowan raised a hand in acknowledgement, the man returned the gesture and began to approach. Morning, he called, voice even, cautious. Up close, the man looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s. His face was lean, skin wind-burned, eyes alert behind thin-rimmed glasses. He carried himself with the careful confidence of someone accustomed to wild places and unpredictable encounters. Name's Eli Ward, he said. I'm with the State University, Wildlife Ecology. Caleb frowned. Didn't hear about any studies. Eli smiled slightly. You wouldn't have. I'm not officially here. Rowan's gaze sharpened. Then why are you? Eli glanced at Briggs, then back to Rowan. Because something unusual's been reported. Large black animal, patterned movement, behavioral anomalies. Briggs shifted his weight, unreadable. Eli noticed. That's a good dog. Rowan didn't respond. I don't want trouble, Eli continued. I document, observe, ask questions. What kind? Rowan asked. Eli hesitated. The kind that don't always have comfortable answers. They spoke for several minutes, standing in the open cold. Eli explained that he'd been tracking unusual movement in the region territorial overlap, altered prey routes, a predator behaving less like a shadow and more like a sentinel. Whatever it is, Eli said, it's not acting alone. Caleb crossed his arms. Meaning? Meaning, Eli replied carefully. It's adjusting its behavior around something, or someone. Rowan felt a familiar tightening behind his eyes. Have you seen it? Rowan asked. Eli nodded once. At a distance. Never this close to a residence. Silence stretched. Then you should leave, Caleb said. Eli studied the tree line again, then nodded. I'll be around. Observation doesn't always require permission. He turned and walked back the way he'd come, footsteps deliberate, measured. Briggs watched him go, tail low, but steady. Rowan exhaled. Great, Caleb muttered. Now. The academics are circling. Rowan didn't smile. They were halfway back to the cabin when Briggs stopped again. This time, he did not growl. He sat. Rowan followed his gaze to the far bank, where Onyx stood half-hidden among the trees. Sunlight filtered through the branches, catching in his black fur like scattered stars. Onyx did not approach. He did not retreat. He watched. Rowan's heart beat once, hard and slow. Caleb whispered, He's closer every day. Rowan nodded, and still choosing distance. Onyx turned his head slightly, eyes tracking Briggs. Briggs rose, posture controlled, and took 2 careful steps forward. Rowan's breath caught. Onyx mirrored the movement 1 step, then another, closing the distance to the water's edge. The lake lay between them, a line neither crossed. Rowan raised his hand. Palm out. Both animals stopped. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Without warning, Onyx lifted his head and let out a short, low sound. Not a howl, not a bark, but a resonant note that vibrated across the ice. The sound echoed once, then died. Briggs reacted instantly, not with alarm, but with a subtle shift in posture. His ears angled forward, body aligning toward Rowan as if receiving instruction. Rowan felt the hairs on his arms rise. That sound wasn't a call. It was a marker, a boundary laid down without threat. Caleb's voice was barely audible. That's not normal, Rowan swallowed. No. Onyx turned and vanished into the trees, leaving the lake empty and the air humming. The rest of the afternoon passed in uneasy quiet. Lucas Reed arrived just before dusk, stepping out of his truck with the same measured calm he'd shown before. He listened as Caleb recounted the morning, eyes narrowing slightly when Eli's name came up. Ward's persistent, Lucas said. Smart, knows when to wait. What happens if he doesn't? Rowan asked. Lucas shrugged. Then people start asking questions. Briggs circled Lucas once, sniffing, then dismissed him, settling near Rowan's boots. Lucas watched the dog. He trusts you. Rowan met his gaze. That's the job. Lucas nodded. Sometimes trust creates ripples. When Lucas left, the sun was sinking fast, bleeding orange and purple into the snow. Night fell harder than expected. Rowan stood outside alone, the cold biting through his jacket, eyes fixed on the darkening tree line. Briggs sat nearby, vigilant but calm. He thought about lines, those drawn in maps and those drawn in blood. Lines crossed and defended, lines that kept order, and lines that broke men. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Caleb stepped out and stood beside him. "You staying long?" Rowan didn't answer right away. "Long enough," he said finally. Caleb nodded. "That's what I figured." From the depths of the forest came a distant sound. Not a howl, not a warning, just movement, presence. Rowan closed his eyes. The forest had drawn its line, and he was standing on it. The pressure didn't arrive with threats. It arrived quietly. Aiden noticed it first in the way the road felt different when he drove into town the next morning. Not empty, not busy, watched. A pickup lingered too long at an intersection. A sedan idled near the hardware store, its engine running though no one got out. Faces turned away, a half-second too late. Nothing illegal, nothing obvious. The kind of attention meant to be felt, not proven. Claire had warned him this would happen. "If he can't take the child," she'd said over the phone, "he'll try to make staying uncomfortable." Aiden parked beside the library and cut the engine. Snow fell in slow, dry flakes, dusting the hood. Coda jumped down from the truck, shook once, and immediately paused. His ears angled back, then forward. His tail stiffened. Aiden followed the dog's gaze. Across the street, a man leaned against a lamppost, pretending to scroll on his phone. He wore a knit cap pulled low and a jacket too thin for the cold. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't look interested. He looked bored. "Come on," Aiden murmured. Inside the library, warmth and quiet wrapped around them. The smell of paper and old carpet lingered in the air. Mabel sat near the back, speaking softly with a woman behind the desk. Evelyn Gallagher was in her late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with iron gray hair cut just below her ears. Her face was weathered, skin freckled from years outdoors, but her eyes were kind and sharp. She had worked at the library most of her life, first shelving books, then running children's programs. People trusted her because she remembered their names and their stories. Beside her stood Tom Gallagher, her husband, a quiet man with a heavy build and permanently reddened hands. He smelled faintly of oil and sawdust, the scent of someone who fixed things rather than replaced them. He nodded at Aiden once, slow and deliberate. "I told her," Evelyn was saying to Mabel, "you don't disappear from town unless something's wrong." Mabel's mouth curved faintly. "I didn't want to bring trouble back with me." Evelyn waved that away. Trouble doesn't need an invitation. Noah sat at a low table nearby, crayons scattered in front of him. He glanced up when Aiden entered, relief flashing across his face. Coda walked straight to the boy and lay down beside his chair. Noah rested one small hand on the dog's back without looking. Aiden felt the tension ease from the room by a fraction. They left together not long after, Evelyn pressing a paper bag of food into Mabel's hands, Tom offering to check the locks at the cabin later that afternoon. No questions, no conditions. Outside, the man by the lamppost was gone. The first sign came less than a mile down the road. Coda shifted in the back seat, then stood, placing his paws against the cab. He let out a short, insistent huff. Aiden pulled over. The underside of Mabel's car was dusted with snow and road salt. Aiden crouched and followed Coda's nose. There, tucked behind the rear bumper, was a small white disc. An air tag, cheap, common, legal to buy, illegal to use this way. Aiden pried it loose and turned it over in his palm. "He's been tracking us," Mabel whispered. Claire arrived 20 minutes later, lights off, posture calm. She examined the device, then slipped it into an evidence bag. "That confirms intent," she said. "Not violence. Surveillance." "What now?" Mabel asked. Claire looked at Aiden. "Now we let him think he's winning." The plan was simple and legal. Claire filed for a temporary surveillance warrant based on stalking behavior and interference with a protected minor. In the meantime, she leaked a controlled piece of misinformation. Nothing false enough to be entrapment, just vague enough to bait. The box, she told a mutual contact, was no longer at the cabin. It was being moved. Aiden hated the waiting. He hated the way the pressure pressed inward, invisible but constant. Nights were the worst. He checked locks twice, then 3 times. Coda slept light, always angled toward Noah. One evening, as snow thickened against the windows, Noah spoke. "Are you going to leave too?" he asked quietly. Aiden looked down at him. The boy's face was thin, eyes too old for 6 years. He held one of Coda's ears between his fingers, rubbing it slowly. "No," Aiden said. The word landed with weight. No qualifiers, no promises wrapped in conditions. Just truth. Noah nodded, as if filing it away for later. That night, the power flickered. Once, twice. The lights dimmed, then steadied. The cabin hummed with sudden quiet. Coda rose instantly and moved to Noah's side, pressing close. His ears flattened, not in fear, but concentration. He stared at the dark window, breathing slow and measured. Aiden felt it then, not danger exactly, but proximity. Someone close enough to matter. The power returned seconds later. Nothing happened, and that was worse. The night stretched long. By morning, tire tracks cut the snow near the tree line, not approaching the cabin, but circling it, testing. Claire came by before noon. "He took the bait," she said. "Someone's been asking questions where they shouldn't." Evelyn and Tom arrived shortly after, Tom with tools in hand, Evelyn with thermoses and quiet resolve. "We'll take shifts," Evelyn said. "Someone's always awake anyway." Mabel protested weakly. No one listened. That afternoon, snow began again, thick and heavy, erasing yesterday's tracks. The forest closed in, patient and indifferent. Inside, the cabin held. Coda lay at Noah's feet. Aiden stood at the window, watching the white swallow the world. Whatever Harlan wanted, he was learning something important. Some things could be taken, others could not. Chapter 6. The Edge of Law and Ice. The knock came just after sunrise. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of authority, the kind that didn't ask permission, only confirmation. Rowan Hale was already awake. He sat at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold, eyes fixed on the frost creeping along the window's edge. Briggs lay at his feet, alert but calm, body angled toward the door, as if he had been expecting this moment since the night before. Caleb answered the knock. 2 men stood on the porch, their breath visible in the air. The first was familiar Lucas Reed, the part-time forest ranger. He looked more rigid than usual, his jacket zipped higher, his jaw tight. The second man was taller and broader, with a square build and a posture shaped by decades of enforcement rather than observation. He had close-cropped hair, a thick neck, and a face weathered by sun and stress. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and tired in the way of someone who had seen too many situations go wrong. "Richard Brennan," the man said, extending a gloved hand as Rowan stepped forward. "State Wildlife Services." Rowan shook it once, firmly. Brennan's grip was strong but measured, a man who knew how much force was necessary and how much was not. "We received a formal complaint," Brennan continued. "Multiple, actually. Reports of a large predatory animal exhibiting abnormal behavior near residences." Caleb crossed his arms. "You mean protecting them?" Brennan's eyes flicked to Caleb, then back to Rowan. "That's one interpretation." Briggs lifted his head, ears forward. Brennan noticed. He always noticed. "That your dog?" he asked. "Yeah," Rowan said. "Well trained," Brennan said neutrally. "He's holding steady." Rowan didn't reply. They walked the property together, the three men and Briggs moving in a loose formation. Brennan studied tracks, distances, angles. He asked precise questions, none of them emotional. "How long has the animal been observed? Does it approach the structure? Any signs of feeding near human dwellings?" Rowan answered honestly. "No," Rowan said. "It keeps distance, always has." Brennan stopped near the ridge overlooking the lake, studying the tree line through binoculars. "Distance is a choice," he said, "and choices can change." Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "Richard, it hasn't shown aggression toward people." Brennan lowered the binoculars. "Predators don't warn before they do." Rowan met his gaze. "Some do." Brennan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in interest. "You've dealt with animals before?" "Different kind," Rowan replied. Brennan nodded. "Danger's still danger." By midday, the decision had been made. "We'll need confirmation," Brennan said. "DNA testing, species classification." Caleb stiffened. "You can't just—" Brennan raised a hand. "We're not seizing anything yet. But if this animal is what we suspect, keeping it near a residence without permits is illegal." Rowan's jaw tightened. "You don't know what it is." Brennan met his eyes. "I know what it isn't." The words settled heavy. Briggs shifted closer to Rowan, pressing lightly against his leg. Brennan watched the interaction with something like respect. "That dog would put himself between you and anything," he said. Rowan nodded. "He already has." The forest reacted before anyone else did. It started with the birds. They went silent. Briggs's head snapped up, body rigid now. Rowan felt it, a familiar tightening, the kind that came before contact. He turned toward the tree line. Onyx stood at the edge of the forest, closer than he had ever been in daylight. Snow dusted his shoulders. His posture was upright, alert, but not aggressive. His eyes moved from Rowan to Briggs, then to the men standing beside them. Brennan froze. "That's him," Lucas said quietly. Brennan's hand drifted toward the tranquilizer rifle slung over his shoulder, not lifting it, just acknowledging its presence. Rowan stepped forward instinctively. "No," he said. "Don't." Brennan held still, eyes locked on the animal. "Sir, step back." Onyx's ears flattened slightly. Not fear, not anger. Calculation. Then he turned and ran, not in panic, in decision. He moved along the ridge, black against white, feet barely breaking the surface of the snow. "Damn it," Brennan muttered. "He's spooked." Lucas moved first. "We can track him." Rowan didn't think. He moved. "Briggs," he said once. The German shepherd was already in motion. They followed the ridge hard and fast, the world narrowing to breath, snow, and direction. Rowan's boots slid on ice, muscles burning, old instincts roaring awake. This was not combat, but it felt close enough to wake the same parts of him. Onyx stayed ahead, never quite out of sight. He wasn't fleeing. He was leading. The ridge dropped suddenly into a steep ravine. The ice there glazed smooth by runoff and refreeze. Rowan saw it a second too late. Onyx's footing slipped. The great black body slid sideways, claws scraping uselessly against ice. Rowan lunged. He hit the ground hard, sliding, fingers clawing for purchase. His left hand caught Onyx's hind leg just above the ankle. The impact wrenched his shoulder, pain flaring white-hot. Onyx twisted instinctively. "Easy!" Rowan shouted, teeth clenched. For a heartbeat, they were suspended man and animal balanced on the edge between control and collapse. Onyx looked back. Their eyes met. Rowan saw something there, not fear, not wildness, trust. Rowan's other hand shot to his belt, fingers finding the nylon cord he always carried. He looped it around his wrist, then around a rock outcropping, half buried in ice. "Hold," he said, not as a command, but a promise. Onyx went still. Briggs arrived then, skidding to Rowan's side, teeth clamping onto Rowan's jacket near the shoulder, pulling backward with controlled force. Lucas joined them seconds later, anchoring the cord, digging his boots into snow. Together, they hauled. Onyx's claws found purchase. His weight shifted upward. With one final surge, he was back on solid ground. Rowan collapsed backward, chest heaving. Onyx stood over him for a moment, massive and silent. Then he stepped back. Instead of vanishing into the trees, Onyx turned. He walked toward Rowan, close, too close. Brennan froze, rifle halfway raised. Onyx lowered his head and pressed his forehead gently against Rowan's chest. Just once. A contact so brief it could have been imagined. Then he stepped away, turning, as Brennan's team finally crested the ridge. Brennan's voice was tight. "That's not how wild animals behave." Rowan pushed himself upright, breath ragged. "No." The tranquilizer dart flew true. It struck Onyx high in the shoulder. He staggered once, then again, legs betraying him as the sedative took hold. Rowan surged forward instinctively, but Brennan caught his arm. "Enough," Brennan said firmly. "He's alive. This is how we keep it that way." Onyx sank to the snow, chest rising and falling slowly. Briggs stood over him, hackles raised, a low sound vibrating in his throat. Not aggression, but protest. Rowan knelt beside the black form, resting one hand briefly against Onyx's fur. "Easy," he whispered. Brennan watched closely. "We're transporting him for testing, temporary holding." Rowan looked up. "You said no seizure." Brennan's jaw tightened. "I said yet. Circumstances changed." The words cut deep. Caleb arrived moments later, breathless, eyes wide at the sight. "Jesus," he muttered. Lucas looked away. By dusk, the truck was gone. The forest felt hollow in its wake. Rowan stood where the ravine dropped away, shoulders slumped, exhaustion settling into his bones. Briggs pressed against him, solid and warm. Caleb joined them quietly. "You did what you could." Rowan nodded, though it felt like a lie. He stared at the darkening trees, replaying the moment on the ice, the weight, the trust, the choice. Lines had been crossed again, this time by law. Rowan exhaled slowly. This isn't over, he said. Caleb's voice was steady. No. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of snow and something else, something missing. Rowan closed his eyes and prepared for the fight that was coming. Chapter 7. The law bends. The bond endures. The first night without Onyx was the quietest Rowan Hale had ever known. Not the gentle quiet of snowfall or dawn. This was the hollow kind, the kind that rang. The forest still breathed, branches still shifted, ice still sang beneath the lake's skin, but something essential had been removed, like a note plucked from a chord and never returned. Rowan sat at the kitchen table, Lensenmalmo, after midnight, boots still on, hands resting flat against the scarred wood. Across the room, Briggs lay awake, head lifted, eyes tracking the door with a patience that felt heavier than vigilance. Caleb Merritt moved about the cabin without speaking. He was not a large man by nature, but grief gave him weight tonight. His shoulders set wider, his steps slower, as if the air itself had thickened. "They'll keep him alive," Caleb said at last, not looking up. "Brennan's not careless." Rowan nodded once. He believed that much. Belief, however, was not the same as relief. Morning brought frost and paperwork. Lucas Reed returned before noon, accompanied this time by a woman Rowan did not recognize. She stepped out of the truck with a leather satchel slung across her shoulder and a posture that suggested purpose rather than apology. She was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with dark hair pulled into a low knot at the nape of her neck. Her coat was charcoal gray, cut clean and practical, boots polished but worn. Her face held sharp lines softened by calm eyes, the look of someone who argued for a living and chose her words like tools. "Eleanor Park," she said, extending her hand. "Environmental law." Rowan shook it, grip firm. "I was contacted by Dr. Marin Ives," Eleanor continued. "She's been consulting on the animal's evaluation." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Consulting how?" Eleanor smiled faintly, by insisting this case not be treated like a checklist. They moved inside, where sunlight spilled across the table, illuminating maps, documents, and a single printed photograph. Onyx, lying sedated in snow, eyes half open, watchful even in stillness. Rowan's chest tightened. Eleanor took a seat, posture straight. "Let's be clear," she said. "If the DNA confirms what they suspect, keeping him here without authorization violates federal wildlife law." Caleb scoffed. "And if releasing him gets him killed?" Eleanor nodded. "That's the question." The days that followed blurred together in a cycle of waiting, arguments, and small victories that felt too fragile to celebrate. Dr. Marin Ives visited twice, each time with the same careful composure. She was calm, packed, and athletic, her weathered face framed by a ponytail streaked with early gray. Her field jacket bore the marks of long seasons outdoors, and her eyes carried the curiosity of someone who had learned to doubt simple explanations. "He's imprinted," Marin said, flipping through her notes. "Deeply. Releasing him into the wild would likely result in conflict with packs or people." Brennan remained unconvinced. "The law doesn't care about feelings," he said over the phone, "or stories." Rowan listened, silent, jaw clenched. Briggs never left his side. The German shepherd's behavior changed subtly, No pacing, no whining. Instead, he stationed himself near windows, doors, thresholds, as if holding space open by will alone. Rowan found himself watching the dog more than the forest. "You still believe he's alive," Rowan murmured one night. Briggs' ears flicked. He pressed his shoulder into Rowan's leg. Belief, Rowan realized, was a language animals spoke fluently. The call came just after dusk. Eleanor's voice was steady, but something beneath it shifted. "The results are back." Rowan's pulse slowed, not from calm, but from focus. "Canis lupus occidentalis," she said. "Northwestern gray wolf. Pure." Rowan closed his eyes. "And?" he asked. "And he chose you," Eleanor continued quietly. "That's not in the report, but it's in the data." Rowan opened his eyes. Outside, Briggs lifted his head, ears angled toward the distant road, as if he had heard the truth before it was spoken. The hearing took place in a county building that smelled of old paper and burnt coffee. Brennan stood on one side of the room, composed, professional. Eleanor stood on the other, notes arranged with surgical precision. Lucas Reed testified first, voice careful, but honest. Marin followed, presenting behavioral assessments, migration anomalies, risk analyses. Rowan was called last. He stood straight, hands at his sides, eyes forward. "Mr. Hale," the judge began, "you understand the risks involved?" Rowan nodded. "Yes. You understand that this animal is not domesticated?" "Yes. And yet you believe he can remain under human supervision without threat to the public?" Rowan paused. He thought of ice under his boots, of breath burning his lungs, of a massive black form choosing restraint over violence. "I believe," Rowan said, voice level, "that he already has." The room stilled. The judge studied him for a long moment. "Conditional authorization," she said finally. "Restricted zone, no public contact, ongoing monitoring, immediate revocation upon violation." Eleanor exhaled. Caleb gripped Rowan's shoulder. Brennan nodded once. "We'll transport him back." Rowan closed his eyes. Onyx returned at dawn. The transport truck pulled into the clearing slowly, tires crunching over frost. Brennan supervised the release personally, tranquilizer rifle left locked inside the cab. When the crate door opened, Onyx did not rush out. He stepped into the light deliberately, head lifting, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. Rowan stood still. Briggs moved to his side, posture calm, steady. Onyx's eyes found them immediately. He walked forward, unhurried, controlled, until he stood a few paces away. His fur was duller from confinement, but his presence filled the space like gravity. He looked at Briggs. Briggs held his gaze. Then Onyx turned to Rowan. No sound passed between them, but the distance closed. Caleb wiped his eyes, pretending it was the cold. The following weeks brought adjustments, fencing, monitoring equipment, routines stricter than any Rowan had lived under since the military. Onyx accepted them without resistance, as if he understood the rules were the price of staying. He never crossed the boundary without invitation. He never approached strangers. He watched and waited. Rowan prepared to leave as winter loosened its grip. His work called him south again, back into a world of schedules and roads. The morning he packed, the sky was clear, the forest sharp with promise. Onyx stood at the edge of the trees. Briggs sat beside Rowan, tail still. Rowan knelt, resting one hand against Briggs's chest. You ready? Briggs leaned forward, steady and certain. Rowan stood and faced the forest. Onyx did not move closer. He did not need to. Rowan met his gaze and nodded once soldier to guardian. The wind moved through the branches, carrying scent and memory. Rowan turned away. As the truck rolled down the drive, Briggs watched the trees until they vanished from view. Only then did he lie down. The bond remained, unbroken, unspoken, enduring. Sometimes the miracle is not thunder from the sky or light breaking through the clouds. Sometimes it is quieter. It is a life crossing another life at the exact moment it would have been lost. A hand reaching out when fear says, let go. A bond forming where reason says it should not exist. If God speaks to us, perhaps He does not always do it in words. Perhaps He does it through timing, through instinct, through a creature sent into our path to remind us that we are not as alone as we think. In our daily lives, we all carry our own storms. Some are visible, some are silent, and sometimes help comes from a place we never expected, through a person, an animal, a moment that feels small, until it changes everything. If this story moved you, let it be a reminder. Pay attention to the quiet signs. Protect what is placed in your care, and do not ignore the pull toward compassion, even when it costs you something. If you believe stories like this matter, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of faith, courage, and the unseen bonds that shape our lives. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and bring peace to your home. May He bless those who are struggling, those who feel forgotten, and those still waiting for their miracle. Sometimes the miracle is already standing right beside us,